Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
It is good to see you, and I mean that. It's a wonderful coincidence, I suppose, that the first thing I'm doing professionally after coming back from Shiva is teaching Torah, which is the thing that I wanted to do when I decided to become a rabbi. So this is healing. And dedicate our study today to the memory of my father, Dr. Michael Kligfeld, who was not a scholar of Rashi on any level. He did not have he had a very robust Jewish education, but not a traditional day school one. My father's father was a Reform rabbi, educated at the JIR before the merger with HUC, so he was educated in a non-denominational setting. His first shul was at a conservative synagogue in Kansas City. He was assistant to Gershon Hadis, and then served a Reform shul on Long Island. And my father, I guess, went to my Saba's religious school, but he went to Camp Masad, which was a really, really great summer camp in the 50s, 60s. Yeah, I forgot if it was Aleph or Bet, but yeah.
Yeah, I went to Aleph for 7 years.
Yeah, and that's where he learned. He learned Hebrew in his house because my grandparents were Hebraicists, and then he was a student of many aspects of Judaism, but probably never studied a Rashi on his own. It just wasn't his education, but loved Torah and the Jewish people in his own very meaningful way. So it's meaningful to dedicate this to him. And let's see where we are. We're in chapter 12 of the book of Shemot. We're getting towards the end of Parshat Bo. We read the first verse, which was just an introduction to this chapter, which really goes in two directions. It's this interlude in the middle of the Exodus story, right? We finished Plague 9. We've been warned about Plague 10. And then we get this interlude about really two rules, a line about Rosh Chodesh, which we'll discuss in a second, and then really all of the instructions for Korban Pesach itself. Verse 1 was, Vayomer Adonai al Moshe v'el Aaron be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor, that God said to Moses and to Aaron in the land of Israel, and this is what he said. And Rashi focused on the be'eretz Mitzrayim phrase. That why is it significant that we learned that that's where he said it? We won't go back into it, and that leads us to a rather famous verse, because as we'll see, it sets up the basics of the lunar calendar that we are still living by to this very day. Okay, so I want to say we are chapter 12, verse 2. Alan, do you want to read HaChodesh Etzalachem? That's fine.
Let's see.
Get a microphone.
HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim Rishon hu lachem lechodshei Hashana. That this month shall be the first month, the beginning of all months, and it seems like it's repeating because it will be for you like the first months of the year.
Right. So the phrase Rosh Chodeshim and Rishon Hu Lachem certainly seem to be evocative of each other. You have to translate it word for word. This month will be to you the head of the months. The first it will be to you of the months of the year. Right. So you would imagine that a terse text could have written that perhaps more compactly. So that raises a question as to what's going on there. And anything else that jumps out at you about the way the verse is constructed, or what might be being conveyed in the verse that's worthy of a question? And by you, I mean anyone.
I just question why the interlude? Why just coming right here for the break?
Okay, so there is a meta question as to what this whole chapter is doing here, and we can kind of come back to that and be reminded of that oddity of the interlude throughout it. I see Joel's hand and I see Joanna's hand. Can you give Joel a microphone? I'll take it off the thing. It's easier to pass.
Well,
in answer to Alan's question, I don't think it's that much of a non sequitur, because it's almost like saying you're about to leave Egypt. This is like the first month of the rest of your life.
Good. All right. So there's a reason why this is significant information. I guess one could make the counter argument, Joel, that, okay, so can we at least finish the story? And then as they're walking out of Egypt, God starts to set out what time will mean to them. But yes, that argument holds some water as well. Joanna, I see your hand.
Like the question of who's establishing the calendar. On the one hand, God is saying this month is the first month. So it feels like God is establishing the calendar. But like not only the Lachem, but the Lachem twice, it seems that there's some sort of involvement of the people also in this count, establishing these months and establishing the head of the year. So what, if any, is their role?
Wonderful. Your comment makes me wonder whether some of the Mishnayot in Masechet Rosh Hashanah that have to do with the role that the rabbis had in establishing the calendar and the extent to which once God essentially handed down that obligation to humans, that it was ours to do right or wrong, and even if we did it wrong, we're doing it right. If somehow that was influenced by the way this verse is written, it's not influenced directly or specifically, but this notion of it being a God-ordained calendar where the lachem is pounded into your head, right? There's some famous Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah about that even if you make a mistake in determining when the new month is, right? It's if you canonize it as the first day of the month, even if you're cosmically wrong, you're right, because God can't come in and tell you were off by a few hours, right? So that everything once was being given over to humanity had a chance of being messed up, but even if it's messed up, it's correct in its own way.
Is that what gives us the permission? Like we do funny things to play with the dates on the calendar so that like holidays fall when we want them, or we don't exactly observe technically on the ordained date and those kinds of things.
Right.
Like not even by mistake, but kavanah.
Right. It's interesting to wonder how our sages gave themselves the right to do that, right? We have an interesting one coming up on January 9th or something. We have Asara B'Tevet on Friday. It's the only fast that can fall out on a Friday. The rabbis set up the calendar in such a way that you never were fasting going into Shabbat, except for Asara B'Tevet. I forgot why. I once knew as to why that wasn't important for them to push, but you don't push off that fast. God gave it lachem, right? Which means it's us to make holy, trying to understand what God had intended, but ultimately it's in our hands. Yeah. Larry, Diane, and then Rick, and then Matt.
So I think your question was what strikes us as being strange about the verse, and this is a calendar question in a different direction. I find it strange that you have the concept of the first of the months as opposed to the beginning of the year. So the calendar says, the verse says nothing about this shall be the new year for you.
Right.
Just this will be the first month.
Right.
And I have always found it really strange that our new year begins in the seventh month. Why does it begin at the beginning of the month? As long as it's starting in the seventh month, why isn't it the seventh day of the seventh month or something like that? This whole concept of the first month and the absence of any talk about a year strikes me as being very strange.
Right. Well, you can go up a level. First of what? Like, what about this was first? Is it first by dint of the fact that this is where our people are being born, and therefore it may not have been the first last year, but now it's the first? Or is there some cosmic first that's being referred to here, right? When the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, or as it were, when Joseph was walking through the fields, was the primordial Nisan the first of anything, or does it become first as a result of this, right? And I think your question also exposed the fact that while the concept of year exists in the Torah, right? Like, but the book of Bamidbar begins with the first month of the second year that they left Egypt. There's a concept of a year. The concept of a month is much more significant to our sense of time in the in the Torah. And even now on some level, it's significant that it's 5785. We sort of wink at it a little bit, like, because we're not really, we modern scientific people are not connecting it back to the creation of the world. But it's much more significant what day of Kislev it is to the Jew than what month of the year it is. And I wonder if that's embedded deep in this. Yeah. Rick, I wonder if Rick's going to make a comment on a thing I think he's going to make a comment on. But we'll see. It'll be we'll have a reveal.
I don't think so. I was just going to go off the wall here. As a Torah reader, it's rare, very, very, very rare that you have all forms of the vowel O in the same sentence.
Exactly what I thought you were going to say.
There's 4 of them, so it's a preview of the big number 4 for Passover, if you want. But you've got the Cho of Chodesh, you've got the Cho of Chodashim, you've got the O of Rishon, and then you have a Kamatz Katan L'Chodshe. So if you're trying to teach a kid all the 4, or an adult, all the 4 O's, they're all right there.
Wow. What I thought you might say, one of your favorite things, Rick, is to pick out the significance of small words, and aren't zez important to you, right? Yeah. So
especially Noah, but yeah.
Right. So to kind of paraphrase Bill Clinton, it depends on what the word "this" means. Like, what's the "this" of Chodesh Hazeh? Because that's really what sends Rashi in the direction we're going to go in. This month, what's the referent of the "this"? Right? Is it a referent to where we are on the calendar, or is there some other kind of acting out that is being applied here? And Rashi gives us both a creative drash, which he rejects, and then a more pshati pshat on that. But the zehness of hazeh is interesting. This month will be for you, meaning what? Matt? Sorry, and then Leonard. Wait, microphone.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I'd like to challenge or to question the use of the word Rosh here. I mean, we're assuming it means the first, but literally it means the head. It'll be the head of the month. So, well, on the other hand, it's parallel construction. They like to say things and to repeat themselves in different ways. So I understand why they're doing that. But what does it mean? This will be the head month? And for us now, we understand it without thinking that the Rosh something means the first. The head is not necessarily the first body part.
Yeah. So right. So could Rosh here originally not have meant a numerical thing, the first in the list, but significance, right? Because Rosh probably means biblically more a question of primacy and in import than in number, right? That's interesting. Yeah, we don't even think about that jump, but we don't know why or how Rosh became the notion of number 1, right? Leonard, and then I see Joanna's hand again.
All right, so I have 2 comments. First of all, you were saying about this month. I think this month means the current month, unless you're pointing to a calendar.
Aha, so remember that when Rashi speaks. Go ahead.
And the other thing is just something that, I had never noticed until now, that Rishon comes from the word Rosh. It never occurred to me before.
See, studying Torah is a good thing. By the way, Leonard, is the dictionary that you use the Klein?
Yeah.
You got paid, not you directly, but you got paid in some ways an extraordinary compliment during the shiva for my father. I want to explain it out. So one of my father's closest friends, is a man named Professor Tzvi Abush, who's probably the world's leading expert in Akkadian for the 6 people on the planet for whom that's significant. But what's that? Which one?
It's an word of affection.
Dish poo.
Dishpoo. So
honey.
Like Dvash. Well, maybe, I don't know. But they went around. When they used to visit us, we had a dog named Kelev, and they called him Kalbu because that's the Akkadian for Kelev. They knew each other in the 60s. Professor Abush married the woman that my father had dated in college at Brandeis. And then he taught for 45 or more years ancient Semitic languages at Brandeis. He's a real scholar. And I don't think I'd seen him in, 25 or 30 years. He has a very distinct voice. And when he came to pay a Shiva call, and he's an elderly man himself and rather frail, his voice is exactly the same. And you hear a voice, and it brought me to my childhood to hear his voice. He's really a scholar of esoterica. And I was telling him about this class, and I was telling him how I love the philology and the going deep into words, and how we compare Jastrow to BDB. And he says, yeah, but without the Klein, what could you possibly know? And this is one of the world's leading experts on etymologies of ancient words. I said, well, thank God we have Leonard Friedman and the Klein dictionary. So he was very impressed that we did this work, not only with, the BDB, everyone does the BDB, but the Klein. So you should be very proud of what you bring to this class. I forgot where we were. Was it Joanna next? Did Leonard and Matt, you both speak? Okay, Joanna.
When you brought up small words before, I thought you were going to go. My mind immediately went to the who. Why Rishon hu lachem, and not just, it could be Rishon lachem lechodshei hashana. So that who appears to be bringing in some extra emphasis, and why?
Yeah, good question. And going back to what Matt said about Rosh, interestingly, Onkelos translates the Rosh as Reish, which is the Aramaic word for Rosh, but he translates the Rishon as Kadamae, first. So he's using two entirely different Aramaic roots to render the words, which in Hebrew are really the same. Rosh and Rishon, he turns into Reish and Kadamae. Interesting stuff. Okay, let's jump into the Rashi. That's back to you, Alan.
Okay. Harehu levana v'chidusha v'amar lo. God, Harehu showed him, God showed Moses the moon, the Chidusha, as the new moon, or it's as part of its new moon or renewal.
Exactly, in its renewal. Bechidusha, with my PK, in its renewal, right?
In its renewal, and said to him, Ke shahayareach mitchadesh yelecha rosh chodesh.
Period. Okay, so the first thing Rashi says is that he's basically playing off the zeh, and remember what Leonard said before about if you're, it could only mean, this if it's if someone is pointing to something, and Rashi says that's exactly what's going on. What happened? In your own words, Alan.
I'm sorry, I missed a beat there. Can you repeat that?
Okay, so Rashi says that, and connected to what Leonard was saying before, is that if the word "this" usually denotes you are current, and you're referring to something specific and even pointing, and that's exactly how Rashi reads it. Herahu levana bechidusha. God showed him. Who's the him? Moses. Et halevana, it's another word for moon, yareach and levana, bechidusha, as it was renewing, which means what did the sky look like?
Well, I guess it's a real question whether it's the darkness or whether it's the first sliver of the moon.
Right, one of the two, and Rashi will go to that question as well, because the darkness is if we had to really slow down time, is the liminal moment in between neither month, right? And then the first sliver is the molad, right? The halachic molad, the birth of the moon. And the texts I was referring to before in Rosh Hashanah are when rabbis are disagreeing as to whether or not they actually can believe the witnesses who said that the moon was born, right? So one or the other, God shows Moses the moon in its moment of renewal, the Amarlo, and said to him, what did he say to him? Shahareach mitchadesh.
When the moon renews itself, will be the beginning of the month for you.
Okay, so this first reading, which is based on a wonderful image of God actually with God's finger as we're pointing the moon, this has nothing to do with this reading, with this month being the first of anything. What did it have to do with? the concept of Rosh Chodesh, right? That's a very different way of reading it. This is the rabbinic imagination saying, this is when God taught Moshe, you're going to have a monthly holiday called Rosh Chodesh. And how are you going to know? Because when the moon looks like this every month, whether it's the first month, the 8th month, the 15th month, that is how you establish it. So in this midrash, the Rosh Chodashim is not the first month, but the beginning of months. Right? And Rashi is about to say, I know that this is taking this out of the more obvious context of the verse, but it's the rabbis trying to imagine God and Moshe talking halachic practice. Right? This is what Rosh Chodesh is going to look like.
There's a very interesting comment right here in Saperstein about this. He says, although the common translation of Rosh Chodesh is new moon, it should be noted that the dictionary's definition of new moon is different than the halachic concept. The English term new moon refers to the period when the moon is invisible. But Rosh Chodesh, or as Rashi writes here, Levana Bechidusha, refers to the reappearance of the moon in its crescent shape after its invisible period.
Right. It's a good, it's that question. It's almost like Zeno's paradox. Like when have we moved from that moon to this moon? You can't slow down time enough to know the exact moment, right? So, is the moment there's no visible moon, is that the death of that moon or the beginning of this moon or both, right? Or is it that first sliver? Halachically, it's the appearance of the sliver, right? That's the argument in Masechet Rosh Hashanah when the witnesses said, we saw, the sliver appear on that side of the moon. I forgot if it's the right or the left. I forgot which one. I forget which direction it waxes and wanes. Anyone knows? Does the sliver of the new moon come on the right side of the moon from our perspective, or the left?
Right. So what you do is you look at the shape.
Yeah.
You draw a line from the.
Wait, you don't have a microphone. Yeah.
It's harder to use my hands that way.
Okay.
So you draw a line from the bottom corner.
Yeah.
To the top corner and bring it up. If it's a B, it's the beginning of the month, and if it's a D, it's the dying of the month.
Okay, so it waxes, it wanes on the right, and it waxes on the left.
It waxes on the right, yes.
Yeah. So now I know, in Learned League, Leonard, if there's a question about moons, I'm going to score you 0 points on it. To reference a nerdy trivia league that Leonard and I are both in. That's a moon.
That's a waiting one.
Very good.
That's the only reason you asked.
Yeah, I just need to set up my defense. Okay, I see Larry Diane's hand, then I see Rebecca's hand.
All right, 2 comments. One is a serious comment on Rashi. The second one is an extension of what you're talking about just now. The one about Rashi is, I'm confused by Rashi's confusion. The verse clearly says, verse 1 clearly says that God is speaking to Moses and Aaron. Verse 2 says, HaChodesh hazeh lachem, and then it says, Rishon hu lachem. Now, the lachem could be to the two of you, Moses and Aaron, or can be to the people, but it's not to Moses. Why does Rashi think that God is only showing this to Moses? And he does it twice in his comment. Anyway,
yeah, so Rashi is about to reject his own comment, but before he rejects it, the internal logic, I think, would be, again, that he's about to dispose of is, God said to Moses and Aaron, this is going to be how the moon begins for all of you guys, lachem, for you people. But Rashi knows that that's not the simplest way to understand the verse. But I want to thank Larry for me coming out of Shiva of my father by providing with me, I think, the first ever defeat of him in this daily trivia league. And I was able to wake up to the news that I had defeated the one who usually vanquishes all of us. So it was very, very kind of you, Larry, to defend me so poorly and think that I wouldn't know. What did you think I wouldn't know?
Arsenio Hall was the star of 3 obscure.
Yeah, Coming to America. Thank you for assuming I wouldn't know that or for getting the wrong number in there. Okay.
Can I make one comment about the moon itself, the new moon?
Yeah.
I've just always, we don't have to dwell on this, probably don't want to dwell on this. I've always found it really peculiar that we start the month with the new moon when you can't see the new moon, because the new moon is basically when the sun is behind it, and it's only visible in a lunar eclipse. Yeah, or solar eclipse, maybe. Yeah, solar eclipse. Otherwise, you can't really see when the moon is completely dark, and that moment when that sliver of the new moon first comes up, because that's happening in the evening time, if I'm not mistaken. Leonard can correct me about that. You can only see the new moon at evening because it's setting at the same time the sun is setting. The full moon you see.
Okay, I don't know anything about that, but going back to what was said before, there is a distinction between the science of when our sight line to the moon moves from not being able to see the last month to being able to see the next one, and the halacha of timing the molad. And if you're if you go to Chabad.com or other websites, like the molad, the birth of the moon, is timed down to the second. And I forgot exactly how they're basing that calculation, but it's not necessarily visible to the eye in the moment that halacha says that the month has been born, right? And some people, we do Birkat HaChodesh every month, except for anticipating Tishrei. We announce what day Rosh Chodesh will begin. In some shuls, they announce what day and what time and what second. They announce the molad, so you can be present to honor its return. Rebecca and then Rick.
What I wanted to say was about this whole sentence doesn't really make sense in terms of its logic, because assuming that the word chodesh comes from the fact that it's a new moon, it's chodesh, it's sort of saying God is telling you that when you have a new moon, you have a new moon. It feels like if we're using that word here already, we already know that that's what when the new month starts.
Yeah, it's from the Department of Redundancy department on some level, right? And it goes to that question, that Matt was asking, when and how did Rosh move from being head to being primacy? And if we go into real time, or real time as imagined by the Torah, in the moment that Moshe was hearing these words, did he not already know what the word Chodesh meant? And if he didn't know what the word Chodesh meant, how would he have understood the verse? And if he did know, then he already knew why it was called Chodesh, right? There's a bit of an Escher painting quality to this. Rick.
I'm sorry Tova isn't here to back me up, but just stating the obvious, the Egyptians were all into the Ra, into the sun god. So here we're starting a new religion, and it's going to be more based on what the moon does for the beginning of our festivals and all that. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. The emphasis is on the moon now and not the sun like the Egyptians.
Absolutely, Rick. Leonard, was your hand up again? Okay, sorry. If you remember, let us know. Okay, so that's the first thing that he remembered. Give that man a microphone.
Okay, so in the Jewish calendar, the Rosh Chodesh doesn't necessarily correspond with anything astronomically, because there are two possible delays. So in fact, the actual first day of the month could be up to 2 days later than it would be the appearance of the new moon.
Or perhaps the lack of appearance of a new moon, because when it's new moon, technically it's when it's invisible and can't be seen.
Right.
And it's only halachically. This is something I was not aware of at all till today. Right. About that halachically, it has to be the sliver, and then it becomes the beginning of the month.
Right, because it's the emergence, not the absence, right? For in this particular moment, I mean, there are a lot of layers of association. The Israelites are learning about assigning their notion of time to the moon, and it's about its birth as a celestial object each month, that the sun doesn't get reborn, the moon does in some level. When our people are doing that, we are that sliver at this moment in our history, right? So our birth as a people, that's why Rashi says in the first comment, which we looked at last time, that the Torah should have begun here, because this is where the Jewish people are born as a people and are given the first commandment as a people. So we are evocative of Chidush HaLevana, right? So it's about the visibility of it, not the fact that it's about to happen, right?
So I just wanted to add that those two delays are put in there to make the holidays fall on the right days of the week.
Right. And on a level of complex math, it was pretty amazing for the rabbis to conceive of 2,000 years ago with an abacus, right? Or however they were doing it. Because I've tried occasionally to dip into it a little bit, and my brain starts to get mushy, and we have all the technology to do it. So it's pretty masterful. Yeah. I have to remind myself why they didn't do it to avoid Asra B'Tevet on Fridays.
Yeah. Well, one of the things they do, it's Lo Adu Rosh, that Rosh Hashanah can't be on a Sunday or
something like that.
Yeah. Whatever.
And this year, Asra B'Tevet is the Friday of the Kol Tefillah conference, and it's interesting. Like you go to, if you're a shul goer, right? You go to shul for Kabbalat Shabbat, which begins with Mincha, and you have a Torah reading on Avinu Malkeinu. It's a really interesting liturgical thing. If you're alert to what usually does and does not happen on certain days of the week, it's weird to go to shul on Friday night for Shabbos davening and you start with Torah reading and Avinu Malkeinu.
Really?
Yeah. And it does. I forgot how often Asra B'Tevet can happen on Fridays. It's not that frequent, but it's not like once every 100 years. Like I'm sure it's not the first time it's happened since I've been here. Okay. That's the first thing Rashi says on the verse. And then he says,
Ve'ein mikra yotze midei pshuto.
Meaning what?
That this reading of it deviates from the simple, from the pshat, from the simple meaning.
But it's ein mikra yotze midei pshuto. I think what he's saying here is, whatever I just said, don't pay too much attention to it.
Yeah.
Because a text ought not or doesn't depart from its simplest reading, which is such a wonderfully funny thing for Rashi to say, because Rashi is constantly driving the text to be Yotzei Midei Pshuto. It's unclear if what Rashi is saying here is a meta comment that we should try to understand the text as simply as possible, or he says, in this case, even though I just brought you a midrash, in this case, I think the better way of reading it is that this verse does not depart from its simple reading. And what is that simple reading?
Al Chodesh Nisan Amar Lo Zeh Yeh Rosh L'Seder Minyan HaChadashim.
Okay, so translate that. So the simplest way of reading this is not that he was saying this is what Rosh Chodesh will look like in the sky, but it's time, not space.
Yeah, that with respect to the month of Nisan, saying that this is going to be the beginning of the months. It's like it's the new year. It's right. The beginning of all the months when you start counting the months.
This becomes the first month in the Seder, the array of the counting of the months. Sheyehei
Iyar Karui Sheni, so that Iyar is going to be called the second month, Sivan Shlishi, and Sivan the third month,
etc., right? Such that Adar becomes the 12th month, right? So Rashi says it's sweet to imagine God pointing to Moshe, predicting halachic conversations in Jerusalem, in the court of Jerusalem 1,000 years later, as to how to identify when Rosh Chodesh has begun. What does it really mean? What it means is God telling Moses and Aaron, we're a lunar people, and this is where you start counting, right? And the Zeh is time. This month that we are in, not that month, not that moon as it looks. What's interesting about what Rashi just did in a few short words is what comes next, because it's hard. I've studied this Rashi many times, and I'm still not sure how to relate the next comment to the two comments he said in one already. But before I go there, any questions on what Rashi just said? Okay, so keep going, Alan.
All right. Hazeh, this. Nitkasha Moshe al Molad Halevana. Nitkasha, it was hard for him to understand or
Exactly right. He was confused
about Molad, about the Molad, the birth of the moon.
Right, the very thing we were talking about. So now Rashi enters into a realm which seems to be similar to the first thing he said in the first comment, which he rejected. Let's imagine that Moses was puzzled by when the moon is actually born, Molad, right? He goes from Rosh head to Molad. Is it born when there's nothing there? Or is it born the first time there's something there? And how much something? And what if, however much the first visible piece of the moon is, you could always, again, going back into Zeno's paradox of math, you could cut that visibility in half and it's still something. And then you could cut that in half and it's still something. So when do we actually know there's enough there to call it the beginning of the month? Go ahead.
Be'ezo shi'ur tera'eh v'tiyeh re'uya lekodesh. Lekadesh.
Probably li kadesh, which we would render as lehit kadesh. It's probably a nifal there.
Oh, it looks like there's a shva underneath that lamad. You're saying it's a
my pointing has a chirik because it's really by what measure teira'eh will it be seen v'tiyeh such that it will be ru'ya appropriate li kadesh to be sanctified. That's why because it's referring to the moon, not to the person doing the sanctification. That's why this was pointing as li kadesh.
I'm curious to see what other people have. If
Safari has li with a shva.
Yeah, this is. I have a li kadesh. It's not li kadesh here.
So I guess you could do it both ways. In that case, you would translate the sentences by what measure will the moon be seen, such that it would be appropriate
to be
for
sanctified.
you.
Yeah.
Likadeshoto, to sanctify it. Okay.
All right. Ve'ha'alo be'etzba et halvana berakia. That's, I guess it's and when it shows that it's going to be
God showed him.
God showed him with a finger, so to speak, the moon in the sky. V'amarlo, and said to him, Bazeh ro'eh v'kadesh.
Do you have ba or ka?
Ka.
Okay. Kaze
ro'eh v'kadesh.
Meaning?
That see it like this and sanctify.
Yeah. When it looks like this, that's the moment of Kiddush Libana or Chidush Libana. Okay. V'ketzad?
V'ketzad ha'ehu. But how could it have been shown?
Right. What do we think that question is? What inside the logic of the Midrash, Rashi asked the question, but wait a second. Ketzad herau, how did God show him? That question could mean what was the is it a question about whether or not God has a finger? Is it a question of what particulars of the moon, what were the criteria that God determined that this was the right moment to show him? It's unclear until we get the answer what question Rashi is actually asking with Ketzad Herau. How did he show him? But he seems to be like once again questioning the midrash he brought. He just brought again for the second time. Unless these are two Rashis that got mixed together, it's hard to know because he seems to have said this already, rejected it. Okay, so God showed in the moon, but how could that have been possible? V'halo, behold.
V'halo lo haya nidaber imo ela bayom. That God only spoke to him during the day. He didn't communicate with him at night.
Hold on one second. I'm just reading Joanna's comment. What short memories we have. 10 of Teva was on a Friday last year. This is 2 years in a row we have this. That's wild. And the next time will be 5794, so about 10 years from now. Thank you for that. That I've forgotten. I wonder if I was away.
Fun trivia.
What's that? It's wonderful trivia. Yeah, it's like the once every 30, 40 years when Shabbat Rosh Chodesh Chanukah falls on December 7th. Once every 40 years or so, Shabbat Rosh Chodesh Chanukah, I've shared this with you, falls on December 7th. What happens liturgically on Shabbat Rosh Chodesh Chanukah?
3 Torahs.
Torah, Torah, Torah.
Oh.
What did the Japanese kamikaze pilots say on Pearl Harbor? Torah, Torah, Torah.
Yes,
Nothing?
Yes,
Nothing?
indeed. No,
It was a silent groan.
December 7th, 1941, a Friday?
It was not, and it wasn't Shabbat Rosh Chodesh Chanukah, but occasionally it does happen. Yeah. It could have been. Okay, so all of a sudden Rashi makes this argument as if we just accept it. But wait a second, don't we all know that God only spoke to Moses during the daytime? And now he gives some proof texts, which are proof texts that don't have nothing to do with. The proof texts are going to be individual times where the Torah says that God did speak to Moses during the day. None of the proof texts will say that he never spoke to Moses not during the day. Okay, Shenemar,
because it's written Bayom Daber Adonai.
So that one's, everyone has that. That's Shemot 6:28. So let's just, you have that in your Chumashim. So go back. Let's take a look at where we are in the story. So this is the end of the second Aliyah, 6:28. Chapter 6:28. Right? Verse 27, just to get some momentum. Heim hadabrim el Paro. They're the ones who spoke to Pharaoh, Melech Mitzrayim, the king of Egypt, lahotzia b'nei Israel mitzrayim, to remove the Israelites from Egypt. Hu Moshe be'Aaron, it's Moses and Aaron. Vayehi, and it was biyom diber Adonai el Moshe be'eretz Mitzrayim. So, in context, this verse means that it was on the day that God spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, all this happened. But Rashi is bringing it as a proof text to say it by bayom. Moses was spoken to by God during the daytime, as if to say only during the daytime. Okay, what's the next one?
Bayom Tzavuto.
Okay, I'm going to put that on the screen. So
That's
this is
Leviticus 7:38.
Right. Okay. So again, it's a non-proof text proof text. Just going back one verse. V'zot Torah la'olad. This is the law of the Ola offering, the one that got burned up completely on the altar. La mincha, and the grain offering. V'lachatat, and the sin offering. V'la'asham, and the guilt offering. V'lamiluim, and the replacement offerings, and the ordination offerings. V'lezevach hashlamim, and the sacrifice called Zevach Hashlamim, Asher Tziva Adonai Moshe, that God commanded to Moses, Bahar Sinai, on the mountain, Biyom Savoto et Bnei Yisrael, right? This does not mean in context, and of course, reader, God only spoke to Moses during the day, but it's another moment where Rashi is connecting Yom to God speaking to Moses, okay? Next one.
Min hayom asher tziva Adonai v'hala.
Okay, that's the next one on the screen. So Numbers 15. 23. Make it a little bigger. Et kol asher tziva Adonai alechem, everything that God has commanded you, biyad Moshe, by the hand of Moshe. Min hayom asher tziva Adonai v'hala l'dor dechem. This is the best one, right? Because here, min hayom doesn't even mean day. It means from now until forever. But for Rashi, it's good enough. We only hear that God speaks to Moses min hayom during the day. Okay, so with that irrefutable proof, microphone.
It's not that important.
It is important.
I was going to ask why he used the word hala instead of gomer, which he usually uses, and I didn't realize it was part of the quote.
Aha, nice.
He needed the mic for that.
He did. Okay, so by now Rashi having proved to us that God only speaks to Moses during the day, he has to answer his question, how was it then that God pointed this out to Moshe because you can't see the birth of the moon during the daytime. I always thought the reason why you couldn't see the birth of the moon during the daytime is not because it literally isn't renewed during the daytime, but because there's too much light to see it. Are you telling me that it's actually the case that it only is born at night? That's when it shifts? That would be weird to me. That can't be, right? Yeah, it has to just be that it's hard to see.
Point of view issue.
Right. Okay, that's what I thought. So Ella
samuch l'shkiat hachama, that it is samuch, it's connected to or close to sunset.
So this was happening right as the sun was going down. Nemralo,
parsha zo.
So this whole section here, parsha just means section, was taking place right as the sun was setting on what we imagine to be the day on which the last day of Adar, as if Adar existed then, and began Nisan.
V'haraehu im chasheva.
Chashecha.
I'm having trouble distinguishing the.
So the resolution is silly and wonderful. Of course, they're talking of the day because God only speaks to Moses during the day. But as the sun was going down, God says to Moses, "Wait. It's like Frisco Kid. Wait. I can't speak to you soon because like by daytime. You see it? That's what I'm talking about. That's what Rosh Chodesh looks like. This is in addition to being a wonderful and silly Rashi, the chiastic structure is interesting. He introduces the notion of the midrash of God pointing out the new moon and then rejects it and says, no, this is just about Nisan being the first month, and then goes back into the thing he had rejected. And within that second time, he actually asks a question on the internal logic of that midrash and then resolves it. So it's just constructed oddly. I would have expected that the first and the third part of this comment would have been all one comment. And then he would have said, yeah, that's very nice, but the real meaning of the pshat is the following. Or reverse. He would have said, it means this, but yesh midrash. There's a midrash that reads it this way, but he divides it. I'm not sure why. Joel, and then you're about to say something else.
It's possible that everyone agrees that the zeh is the pointing. The question is he pointing to the beginning of the month, or is he pointing to this month is the beginning of the months?
Okay, it's a possibility. Alan and Rick?
I was just confused about the chiasm component of it, because I always thought if it's a chiasm, it would be A-B-B-A, that the first and the fourth would be the same thing, not the first and the third. But is that... I'm not fluent enough with respect to this understanding it completely to understand what's being compared to what.
I'm using that term non-technically. My understanding that A-B-B-A is definitely chiastic. Can't A-B-A also be thought of chiastic?
If it's just the three, I guess it could be, but the four...
But I'm saying there are three here.
There's three.
The way I'm choosing to graph this, there's Rashi saying he pointed him, telling you that's what the moon should look like. B would be, no, that's silly. This is about setting up a lunar calendar, and this is the first month of the year. And then back to A, what did he do? He pointed to the month and said that he pointed to the moon, saying that's what the moon looks like in its birth. Yeah.
Okay.
Rick.
Hi. One more thing, fighting against Egypt. At nighttime is when the sun god goes down and he's fighting all these bad demons underneath the earth, and then he pops up on the east again. So when the Egyptians they're most scared, they're afraid during the nighttime of what's going to happen. Primitive people anyway. We're saying, no, nighttime is great. That's when we're going to start things. And that's where we're going to leave Egypt, is in the nighttime. And we're okay with nighttime. Anyway,
yeah,
just
great. Right.
More on that. The sun isn't the whole thing.
Yeah. And we've had Kechatzot Halayla. We're going to have Bechatzi Halayla. You're right. Where our redemption comes in the middle of the night. Good. Okay. Very rich verse. Any last questions or comment before we go to the next one? Rebecca, let's give her a microphone.
So what I'm gonna say now, I'm not really sure about, but I think that the time that you see the beginning of the moon changes during the year. And so could it be that what he's trying to say is that when you see the birth of the moon this way in the position this way in the sky, this is Nisan.
Interesting.
And so that is sort of, he's pulling you back into that in that second. I don't know the exact how that works exactly astronomically, but I do believe that there's some consistency.
That would be fascinating.
Over this, the sun year.
As if to say that the Nisan moon always is visible in this way as compared to the Tishrei moon.
If you add the leap year.
Yeah, interesting. That's interesting. Wonderful. Okay. Larry, Diane?
Yeah, this question is prompted by quickly looking at the Rambam, which I'm not suggesting we do, and then goes back to verse 1, where it says that V'yomer Adonai el Moshe ve'el Aharon be'eretz Mitzrayim. So we know that there's a whole discussion in the Talmud, which Joel and I are in the middle of, about which mitzvot apply to the land of Israel and which mitzvot apply outside the land of Israel. So did any rabbi ever suggest that maybe counting the moons was only applicable in Mitzrayim and not Ba'aretz or in the rest of the world?
As Marcel Marceau said in the movie Silent Movie, no. As far as I know, that has never been considered. But it's an interesting comment nonetheless, right? No one has suggested that the fact that this conversation is taking place Eretz Mitzrayim and that the Torah goes to lengths to reinforce that suggests that this law only obtains in the land of Egypt. But it's still an interesting comment. Yes, Matt.
In your response to your question about where the moon appears, I went to an art show once, and there was a beautiful picture of, it was like a reconstruction of the famous Ansel Adams picture of the moon rising over the mountains in New Mexico, in El Mar Gordo, I think. And this photographer had duplicated it. So I was talking to him about it. And he says, yes, he says, it happens every 19 years.
Wow.
18.6 years. Yeah.
18.6? Well, okay, so he was rounding up.
Wow.
So 19 years, how often?
That's our, exactly, right. So that shows that within that 19-year cycle, it looks a little bit different where it comes up.
We had the month 7 times every 19 years.
Rebecca?
So we just had what's called a lunar standstill on Sunday evening. So that's where every 18.6 years, the moon reaches the furthest points in its orbit around Earth.
And it just happened?
Yeah, on Sunday evening.
The thing that happens once every 18.6 years just happened?
Yes, when we went to your house for Shiva, it was happening. Well, let me just say also, that's when the moon will rise as far north as it can in the sky, marking the beginning of a lunar standstill.
Yeah, so every 18.6 years, it's at the farthest north that it can get. But every year it goes, as the winter approaches, the moon will rise and set further and further north. So it's moving north. At a certain point, it looks like it doesn't move. That's why it's called a standstill.
I see.
And then it turns around and starts going back the other way. So you have a standstill every year, but the maximum standstill happens every 18.6 years.
The zenith standstill, if you will, not the RCA standstill.
And
Is the contra also true that the closest occurs every 18.6 years?
I don't think it has anything to do with how far away the moon is from the Earth.
And there's also a solar standstill. So you know what that's called?
No.
Solstice means sun still. Yeah.
Good stuff, everyone. Thank you for all those contributions. Let's go to verse 3. Carol, you want to read verse 3?
Dabru el kol adat Yisrael lemor be'asor lachodesh hazeh ve'yichu lahem ish se levet avot se labayit.
Okay.
speak to the community of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, you will take to them.
The subject of Vayichu is they. They will. They shall take.
They shall take
to them, for themselves, something like that.
For themselves a lamb for the house of their fathers, a lamb for the house.
Okay, good. So before we have any idea what's happening in the verse, as Carol was working over the last phrase, there's another redundancy there, right? Whatever selavet avot is, it seems a lot like selavayet. We'll have to figure out what's the difference between a beit avot and a bayit, right? Literally the house of ancestors versus a house, okay? Pulling up a level, what are we about to be learning about in these verses? What is this setting up, Alan?
This is setting up the first Korban Pesach, the first Seder Pesach in Egypt.
Right, which means that all of the material in the Torah that might be about the notion of a lunar calendar and Rosh Chodesh was one verse. Verse 2, that was it. We spent a long time on it, which is good. By verse 3, we're out of that. We're now talking about the specific instructions for the ritual that's going to happen on Exodus night that will serve as a template, a paradigm for future years, right? We're no longer discussing pointing to the moon midrashically. We're no longer discussing this as the first of the months. We're saying, okay, you guys got to do something because Exodus is coming, right? So if we slow down the translation, right, now Moses and Aaron, now that in one verse I've told you everything I need to tell you about the lunar calendar, speak to the Israelites and tell them that the next thing they need to do, anticipating Exodus, is on the 10th of this month, and we can talk about the significance of the 10th in a second. What do they need to do? They each need to take a seh, a goat, or some other similar animal, and it seems to be one seh per beit avot, and or I'll put that in and or as a right now because it's hard to know which way to read it, and or one seh per house. If you haven't read ahead and you're just looking at the words, what do we might think is the distinction between a beit avot and a bayit? And are we being told that they should do two things or one or the other? What do you think? And there's no one answer. Rashi gives one answer. It doesn't mean he's right. Anyone?
A beit avot is a retirement job.
Yes, I was wondering if someone's going to make that joke. Beit avot is one of the euphemisms in Hebrew for a retirement community, a house of your ancestors. So yes, so the Carmel got a seh, and also every house got a seh. What are some other possibilities what the phrase might mean? Assuming it means two different things. Joel, get a microphone, then Rebecca.
Well, I mean, Beit Avot could be your tribe, and your Bayit is your nuclear family.
So Beit Avot could be bigger, and then Bayit is who lives in your house, and therefore, what does the verse mean? Joel said, I have no idea, right? So if it's a house, if it's a seh per tribe, and it's also a seh per house, what does that mean? Does it mean that, like, let's say there are 8 batim in a Beit Avot? I'm just making that up. Are we saying that each bayit has to sacrifice a goat and one per, large family, family tree? It's hard to know. Okay. Someone else is going to make a suggestion, then we can end it because we're at the time. Larry Dan, you get, Rebecca, then Larry Dan, then we'll end it.
I was just going to use the word family instead of tribe. So,
and family in this case
versus the actual house.
Yeah.
The structure.
So, right.
I don't know why.
One for everyone who is considered part of this family, and then one for this domicile, right? And then it's still unclear if it's an and or if it's an or. Right. Larry Dan, and then your last comment.
I was going to suggest it's an or as opposed to an and.
Okay.
In other words, if you can't, your big family can do it and you're okay. But if you can do it individually, that's also okay. But I want to just point out one other thing. The verse starts, Dabru. He's speaking to Aaron and Moses, which suggests to me that the second verse was never there to begin with. Second verse is one of these things that was added by someone who decided, hey, this would be a good time to explain why it is that Nisan is the first month.
Interesting. I don't know the biblical scholarship on these verses per se, but it would not surprise me if something like that has been suggested. Remember what Larry said when we study next time. I'll tell you when that's going to happen in a second. This idea that it might mean that either of these two ways of doing it, a sef per whole family unit or the sef for the domicile, could be a proper way of doing Korban Pesach. Next Wednesday, I'm not here. Do people want to study Christmas Day? Are you available, Leonard? Okay. It's a holiday. Okay.
You're not supposed to deal with Holy Family.
That's true. 2 weeks from today, I'm landing from Israel that morning, hopefully in time to make minyan. I know it's New Year's Day. Are people? Yeah, I'll definitely have to make minyan because minyan will be 8. Are people not? We're not studying Rashi on New Year's Day. I'm fine with that. Okay, so I'll put this in the WhatsApp group. No class either the next 2 weeks, and then the next time we'll meet is on January 8th.
My son's birthday.
Bye, everybody. Happy almost Asra B'Tevet.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.